The event was set against the backdrop of one of the most innovative venues in the city, a place where technology and luxury seamlessly collided. As you approached, the first thing you noticed was the sleek, glass facade, reflecting the city lights in a way that made the entire building look like a futuristic monolith, standing tall amidst the old-world charm of its surroundings. It was an exclusive event, and the invitations had been carefully curated, with only a select few being given access. The air was thick with anticipation, as this wasn't just another conference, it was a gathering of the brightest minds, those who were shaping the future of technology and business. People in power, venture capitalists, renowned engineers, and visionary entrepreneurs, all moving through the venue with a quiet sense of purpose. The inside of the venue was equally impressive, with a design that could only be described as minimalist perfection. High ceilings arched over a vast space, their curves mirroring the sleekness of the modern furniture scattered throughout. Everywhere you looked, there was something cutting-edge interactive touchscreens embedded into walls, holographic projections casting light into corners of the room, and soft, ambient music that seemed to move with the flow of the crowd. The lighting, soft but purposeful, bathed everything in an ethereal glow, making the atmosphere feel like a dream, a place where ideas would take flight and leave an impact. There was a sense of exclusivity here, only the handpicked were allowed entry. The guest list was guarded, and those present were all deeply connected to the world of technology and innovation, each person carrying the weight of years of work and the potential to change industries with a single idea. People were exchanging ideas, making deals, and engaging in conversations that could set the stage for breakthroughs, but there was also a palpable sense of mystery. Conversations were hush, reserved for the right audience, and there were whispers about secret deals being made in back rooms, partnerships that could alter the landscape of the tech world as it was known. It was in this atmosphere, with everything designed to fuel creativity and exclusivity, that Stephen Curry found himself amidst it all, standing in the center of a world that, while foreign to him, had its own charm. The night was unfolding with the usual buzz of eager innovators and curious onlookers, but an unexpected shift came when the doors to the event hall opened again, this time with a quiet but undeniable force. The hum of conversations seemed to pause for a second as everyone turned toward the entrance, where a figure stood, standing out like a silhouette against the dimly lit doorway. She wasn't dressed in the sleek, tailored suits or the designer attire typical of the tech elite crowd. Instead, she wore a simple, flowing dress, understated yet elegant, its muted tones making her seem almost out of place in a sea of business formalities. Her entrance was almost like a ripple in the calm of a lake, the quiet uncertainty of her presence causing a brief moment of collective hesitation. Whispers began to circulate almost immediately, a flurry of speculation among the guests as to who she was and what she might be doing here. Some exchanged glances, while others leaned in to share their thoughts, assuming she had perhaps stumbled in by mistake or was a plus one of someone who was part of the inner circle. No one had seen her before, and in a place where names were important and familiarity could open doors, her unfamiliarity was enough to stir curiosity. She hesitated for a moment at the door, looking over the room like someone unsure of whether they truly belonged. It was clear she wasn't just another guest. There was something about her, a quiet intensity, an almost palpable sense of both excitement and nervousness that made her stand apart. She lingered by the entrance, scanning the room as though searching for someone, or maybe for the courage to approach someone in this sea of accomplished professionals. Her eyes flitted over the group, landing on faces that seemed to melt into one another in a blur of power suits and carefully crafted smiles. But then, her gaze shifted, landing squarely on Stephen Curry, who was standing with a small group near the bar. He was casually talking to a fellow entrepreneur, but the moment their eyes met, something shifted. The young woman seemed to pause for a split second, unsure if she should approach, her fingers nervously fidgeting with the strap of her small, understated bag. It was as if she was fighting an inner battle should she step forward, risking interrupting a conversation, or retreat into the shadows, remaining an observer. Curry, of course, noticed the hesitation. Despite the conversation he was engaged in, he recognized the unease in her posture, the way she lingered on the threshold, unsure of how to move forward. Without a word, he gave a subtle nod toward her, an invitation for her to approach. It was a simple gesture, but one that seemed to release some of the tension in the air. She took a deep breath, and with measured steps, made her way toward the small group, the soft clink of her shoes against the polished floor the only sound accompanying her. The room seemed to hold its collective breath as the young woman walked toward them. Her arrival, while still surrounded by whispers, felt like a quiet disruption, a moment of vulnerability in the midst of polished professionals. She reached them, and Curry smiled warmly, his presence immediately calming her. "Hey there," he said, his voice deep but welcoming, effortlessly putting her at ease. He gestured to the small group. "We're just talking about some ideas. What's your name?" The woman introduced herself, her voice a little shaky at first, but gaining strength as she continued. She explained, almost apologetically, that she was a young entrepreneur working on a tech project she believed had the potential to make a real difference. She hadn't been able to break into the right networks yet, and she felt a little out of place in a room filled with seasoned experts. But her passion was palpable, and there was a genuine fire in her words that made her stand out. Curry listened intently, his attention never wavering as she spoke. He didn't seem to mind that the event had been intended for the industry's top-tier figures. It was clear he didn't see her as an outsider, he saw someone with potential. She had come here to network, hoping for advice or maybe even a connection that could help bring her vision to life. Curry's focus was unshakable, and as she spoke, it was evident that he wasn't just humoring her. He was truly engaged, asking questions that went beyond the surface and into the details of her work. "Tell me more about what you're building," he asked, his voice calm and encouraging. It was the kind of question that wasn't just meant to fill the silence, it was one that invited deeper conversation. The young woman, initially nervous, started to relax as she spoke. Her ideas flowed more easily as Curry nodded and asked more questions, his genuine interest making her feel seen in a way she hadn't expected. She shared her struggles, the challenges of building something without the resources others took for granted, and her frustration with the lack of support. "You're onto something," Curry said after a while, his voice full of assurance. "Don't let the setbacks stop you." We all go through that. He looked around at the others, many of whom were still watching the conversation from a distance. Then, as though the moment was just between them, Curry turned to her with a smile. "You're going to get there," he added. "Keep pushing. People will listen. And I'm sure there's a lot of people here who can help you get started." The doors to the event hall swung open with a soft swoosh, barely noticed by the sea of people engrossed in their conversations and phone screens. But for those who were paying attention, the subtle change in the atmosphere was undeniable. A figure stepped through the threshold, standing there for a moment, almost as if to gather her bearings. The quiet entry didn't go unnoticed, heads turned in her direction, some out of curiosity, others with a quiet sense of surprise. She was an unfamiliar face in a room full of well-known tech moguls and high-powered entrepreneurs, the kind of people whose names were regularly splashed across business magazines and social media. Her attire, though stylish, was an odd contrast to the usual designer suits and sleek, tailored outfits that filled the space. She wore a simple dress, one that seemed out of place in a crowd of expensive fabrics and cutting-edge styles. The dress wasn't flashy, but it had a timeless, understated elegance to it, which made her stand out in a way that no designer label could. For a moment, she hesitated at the entrance, unsure of what to do. She didn't seem to belong in this world of tech giants and venture capitalists, where success and status were worn as effortlessly as the latest gadget. Her fingers lightly brushed the edges of the small clutch bag she carried, as if searching for reassurance. She scanned the room briefly, as though looking for someone, or perhaps trying to work up the courage to move forward. The buzz of chatter continued, but there was a growing undercurrent of whispers. Who was she? Why was she here? Was she here? Was she an invited guest or a latecomer who had slipped in unnoticed? The murmurs spread through the crowd, and a few curious eyes followed her every move. She didn't quite seem like an outsider, but she didn't fit the mold either. As she looked around, her gaze landed on someone in particular, Stephen Curry. He was standing at the bar, casually talking to a small group of entrepreneurs, but the moment their eyes met, something shifted. Curry, known for his warmth and charisma, caught the slight uncertainty in her eyes and felt an instinctual pull to offer her some encouragement. Without thinking, he smiled and gave her a subtle nod, an unspoken invitation to approach. The gesture was simple, but it seemed to ease her anxiety. Taking a deep breath, she straightened her posture and, with tentative steps, made her way toward him. As she walked, a quiet tension seemed to lift from her shoulders, and the murmurs of the crowd began to quiet down. It was as though the energy of the room had shifted with her entrance, drawing attention not just to her, but to the quiet yet palpable energy she carried with her. When she reached Curry's group, he greeted her with the kind of warmth that immediately put her at ease. "Hey there, how's it going?" he said, his tone open and friendly. The group around him noticed the newcomer but made no judgment, allowing the conversation to flow naturally. She introduced herself, and Curry, ever the gracious host, listened intently as she spoke, his eyes meeting hers with an unwavering focus. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant at first, but there was a quiet determination in her words that couldn't be ignored. She shared that she was an aspiring entrepreneur, someone with a vision but not yet the resources to turn it into reality. There was an honesty in her tone, a vulnerability that was both refreshing and endearing. Curry, unlike most in the room who were used to a more polished presentation, didn't brush her off with the usual polite responses. Instead, he leaned in slightly, his interest piqued. "Tell me more," he encouraged, genuinely curious about her idea. The young woman, encouraged by his genuine attention, continued, explaining her project, a tech initiative aimed at addressing gaps in education for underserved communities. Her vision was ambitious, but her lack of connections and resources weighed heavily on her. She spoke openly about her challenges, the setbacks she'd faced, and the fears that had almost held her back from even coming to the event. Yet, as she spoke, there was no pity in her voice, only a raw determination. Curry listened intently, asking thoughtful questions that helped her dig deeper into the heart of her project. It was clear that he wasn't just listening to her words, but also to the drive behind them. "I think you've got something here," he said after a long pause. "It's not easy, but you're on the right track. Don't let the doubt stop you." The young woman, taken aback by his words, blinked for a moment, as if the encouragement was something she hadn't fully expected. "You think so?" she asked, her voice tinged with a mix of disbelief and hope. Curry smiled, nodding with quiet confidence. "I do," he replied. "Sometimes, all it takes is one person to believe in your idea to make it real. Don't let anyone, least of all yourself, tell you it's impossible." There was something in his voice that made her feel like she wasn't alone in her struggles. In a room full of high-profile figures, where power and prestige often overshadowed authenticity, Curry's simple, but genuine belief in her idea felt like a breath of fresh air. It wasn't about the network or the financial backing, but about believing in the potential for real change, in making a difference. As the conversation continued, the young woman's nervousness slowly began to fade. She shared more about her challenges, but also her hopes for what she could accomplish if given the right support. Curry, ever the mentor, didn't offer quick fixes or superficial advice. Instead, he asked thoughtful questions that helped her refine her thinking. He suggested people she could connect with, resources she might explore, and ways to approach potential investors. By the time their conversation ended, the young woman felt like she had made a significant step forward, not just in terms of her project, but in believing that it was possible to make her vision a reality. As she left the group to rejoin the crowd, she couldn't help but feel that her entrance into the room had been more than just a physical arrival. It had been the beginning of something far more meaningful. As the young woman approached, there was a moment of stillness, a pause in the flow of conversation, as though the room itself held its breath. Stephen Curry, who had noticed her uncertainty, stood up slightly, his warm smile never wavering. His presence was calm, an anchor in a sea of fast-moving conversations and tech talk. The small group of entrepreneurs around him gave a courteous nod, stepping back just enough to create space for the newcomer, but still keeping their eyes on the unfolding scene. Curry's expression remained genuine and inviting, his eyes locking with hers with a level of focus that suggested he was fully present, not distracted by the clatter of the event around them. As she came closer, her steps slowed, unsure of the reception she would receive. But when Curry spoke, his voice was soft, grounded in a way that instantly reassured her. "Hi, I'm Stephen," he said, his tone warm but not overbearing. "It's great to see you here." There was no rush in his greeting, no sense of an agenda. He wasn't looking to network, not in the way others in the room did, ready to pitch or barter. It was just a simple, human greeting, and it was all she needed. Her nervous energy, which had been so evident a moment ago, began to ease as he motioned for her to join them. She could feel the sincerity in his gesture. No one was watching her with judgment or skepticism. Instead, they were simply waiting for her to be part of the conversation. With a quiet nod, she took the opportunity to introduce herself, her voice still a little unsure but growing steadier with every word. "I'm Elena," she said. "Elena Brown. I'm working on a project, but it's still in the early stages." Curry, without missing a beat, smiled. "That's where the best ideas start, right?" he said with a chuckle. The simplicity of his words struck a chord with her. In a space filled with polished pitches and ambitious claims, this moment felt different. Curry wasn't treating her like an aspiring entrepreneur with an unfinished idea, he was treating her like someone with potential, someone worth listening to. As she spoke more about her project, Curry's attention never wavered. He asked questions that dug deeper into her motivations, not just her product, but the why behind it. What drives you to keep going, he asked, his eyes not just observing, but truly engaging with her. The group that had gathered around them had begun to fade into the background, as though the world around them had shrunk into the space they occupied. There was a quiet stillness now, a moment of connection amidst the noise of the event. Elena found herself sharing more than she had intended, revealing the personal struggles behind her project and the doubts that often clouded her path. Curry, never interrupting, nodded thoughtfully. His responses were always encouraging, but more importantly, they were thoughtful. He didn't offer quick solutions or promises. Instead, he helped her see the gaps she hadn't noticed and gently offered ways to bridge them. When their conversation finally began to wind down, there was a noticeable shift. Elena was no longer the nervous young woman unsure of her place at the event. She was a determined individual with a clearer sense of direction. Curry's warmth, his genuine interest, had turned what could have been a fleeting moment into something meaningful. As the crowd around them began to shift back into their usual rhythm, Elena stood a little taller, her nerves replaced by a quiet confidence. She didn't feel alone in the room anymore. With one kind interaction, Stephen Curry had made her feel like she belonged, not just at that event, but in the larger conversation about the future of tech and innovation. As she made her way to the edge of the group, she stole a quick glance back at Curry. He was already deep in conversation with someone else, but when their eyes met, he offered another smile, this one smaller, but still just as genuine. And in that brief moment, Elena understood something important. In a world often consumed by competition and comparison, there were people willing to help, to make space, to welcome others into the fold. Stephen Curry had given her that warm welcome, and with it, a renewed sense of possibility. As the evening unfolded, Elena felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude and disbelief. Stephen Curry, a figure she had admired from afar for his athleticism, had shifted roles from a celebrated sports icon to a mentor, offering guidance in a way she hadn't expected. He pulled her aside once more, away from the buzz of the event, into a quieter corner where their conversation could be more intimate. The dim light of the room flickered around them, casting soft shadows, yet the space felt safe, almost cocooned from the world outside. Curry's approach was unlike any other mentor she'd encountered. Rather than offering superficial advice, he dug deeper, probing not just her business but her mindset. "What's your biggest fear in this?" he asked, his voice steady and kind. Elena hesitated, unsure of how much to share. But in his calm presence, she found herself answering truthfully her fear of failure, of not being able to make the impact she envisioned. Curry nodded, absorbing her words. "It's okay to have fear," he said. "What matters is whether it pushes you forward or holds you back." His words struck a chord deep within her. It wasn't just a motivational line, it was a challenge to face her doubts and use them as fuel. He gave her specific advice on refining her pitch, shared names of influential people she could contact, and even mentioned potential resources to fund her project. Before parting ways, Curry offered one final piece of advice. "Believe in your vision," he said, his tone sincere. "The world needs more people like you." Elena left that conversation not just with ideas, but with the certainty that someone believed in her. The following morning, Elena awoke to a whirlwind of notifications. What had started as a quiet moment of mentorship had exploded into public attention. The footage of her conversation with Stephen Curry had somehow made its way online, and social media was abuzz. Videos, tweets, and memes circulated wildly, many speculating on the nature of their interaction. Some users were intrigued by the idea that an entrepreneur had received advice from a sports icon, while others imagined wild scenarios about potential collaborations. At first, Elena was taken aback. She hadn't expected her quiet, personal conversation to be broadcast to the world. She found herself scrolling through the flood of comments, each one offering a different interpretation. While some praised Curry's generosity and mentorship, others fixated on trivial details: her nervous gestures, the way she'd looked at him when she spoke. The rumors quickly grew, from casual curiosity to full-blown speculation. Despite the overwhelming attention, Elena refused to stay silent. In a calm, measured post, she took to her social media to clear the air. She shared the true story of that evening, not about celebrities or speculation, but about the genuine connection she had with Curry. She spoke about his thoughtful questions, the advice that had empowered her, and the way he made her feel truly seen. The post resonated with many, shifting the narrative from gossip to a story of mentorship, and reminding others that even the most unexpected moments could change lives. The online conversation began to change. Instead of focusing on the spectacle, people began sharing their own experiences of mentorship and support. Alina's post had managed to reclaim the story, turning it from an internet frenzy into a meaningful discussion about the importance of helping others.